September 15th, 2008. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy at 1:45 in the morning. By the time markets open, $700 billion in global wealth has already begun evaporating. Within weeks, the number climbs to $13 trillion. Retirement accounts cut in half overnight. Homes worth less than the loans against them. 8 million people walking out of offices for the last time. Not because they failed at their jobs, but because the financial architecture surrounding those jobs had been built on assumptions that were never true. Assumptions that every bank, every mortgage lender, every rating agency had agreed to treat as solid ground until the morning they didn't. That same morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, an Amish farmer got up before dawn and went to work. No margin call had arrived in the night. No bank had frozen his operating line. No mortgage payment had suddenly exceeded the value of the property it was attached to. The crisis that was, at that exact moment, dismantling the financial lives of millions of American families had no mechanism by which it could reach him. Not because he was lucky, not because he was isolated from the economy, not because he had done something extraordinary, but because the financial structure Ezekiel documented in his 1887 Lancaster County ledger, the document sitting on my desk right now, contains no load-bearing wall that 2008 could collapse. Think about what that means. The worst financial crisis in a century, one that erased $13 trillion in household wealth, triggered 3.8 million foreclosures, and cost 8.7 million Americans their jobs, had zero effect on a community that participates in the same market economy you do, sells into it, buys from it, operates within it every single day. The difference was not separation from the market. The difference was a specific financial architecture built on 3 structural principles that Ezekiel recorded in 1887 and that his community has maintained without a single exception across every economic crisis since. I have spent 2 years working through that ledger. And the further I get into it, the more one question becomes impossible to ignore. If the system that protected every Amish family through 2008 is documented, arithmetically precise, and requires no exotic financial product to implement, why has no one explained it clearly until now? The answer starts on page 9. With a sentence, the modern mortgage industry has spent 80 years making sure you never read. In September 2008, the United States lost $13 trillion in household wealth in a single quarter, not over a decade, not over a year, 1 quarter. The S&P 500 fell 38.5% by year end. 3.8 million homes went into foreclosure. 8.7 million Americans lost their jobs. The average household net worth dropped by 40%. Wealth that had taken families an entire working lifetime to accumulate, gone inside 12 months, through a mechanism most of them did not understand and had never consented to participate in directly. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, during that same period, Amish farm output held steady. Amish construction continued. Amish household debt levels did not change because they had been at zero before the crisis and remained at zero after it. No Amish family in Holmes County, Lancaster County, or the Indiana settlements lost a home to foreclosure in 2008. Not one, because not one of them had a mortgage. I want to be precise about what I am saying here, because this is not a story about luck or isolation or religious discipline, keeping a community safe from the outside world. This is a story about architecture. The 2008 financial crisis was not a natural disaster. It was a structural failure. A specific set of financial mechanisms assembled over decades, each one individually profitable for the institutions building them. Collectively catastrophic for everyone connected to them when the load-bearing assumptions finally gave way. The Amish were not protected from that collapse because they were lucky or naive or sheltered. They were protected because Ezekiel's community had built a completely different structure, one that had no load-bearing assumptions the crisis could reach. Let me show you exactly what that structure looked like and why the gap between it and the modern financial system was not a matter of belief or culture. It was a matter of engineering. The 2008 crisis had three mechanisms at its core. Understanding each one is the only way to understand why the Amish were structurally immune to all three, not as a side effect of their lifestyle, but as a direct consequence of specific financial decisions their communities had been making for 200 years. The first mechanism was mortgage debt at scale. By 2006, American households were carrying approximately $9.9 trillion in outstanding mortgage debt, a number that had more than doubled in a single decade, driven by a lending environment that had systematically loosened its standards until institutions were issuing 30-year loans to borrowers who could not demonstrate the ability to make the first payment. The entire system was predicated on one assumption: that housing prices would continue to rise indefinitely. When that assumption broke, when prices began falling in 2006 and accelerated through 2008, the collateral evaporated and the debt remained. Millions of families were left holding obligations larger than the assets those obligations had purchased. Ezekiel addressed this mechanism directly on page 9 of his 1887 ledger. He wrote, "Ein Haus auf fremdem Grund gehört dem Fremden." A house built on another man's ground belongs to the other man. He was not writing about 2008. He was recording the foundational Amish principle of Schuldfreiheit, freedom from debt, as it applied specifically to property. In Ezekiel's community, a family did not acquire land or a home until it could pay for that land or home in full from accumulated surplus and community capital. The process took longer, sometimes a generation longer, but at the end of it, the house stood on ground that belonged entirely to the family standing in it. No lender held a claim. No market fluctuation could make the debt larger than the asset. No crisis could trigger a foreclosure because there was no foreclosure mechanism to trigger. The Amish did not avoid the 2008 mortgage crisis because they were opposed to home ownership. They avoided it because they were opposed to the specific financial instrument through which most Americans acquired home ownership. An instrument that transferred the real risk of property ownership to the borrower while transferring the real profit of property financing to the lender, and that required housing prices to rise indefinitely to remain solvent. That instrument failed in 2008 because its foundational assumption was wrong. Ezekiel's community never adopted it in the first place because 200 years of observation had taught them that any financial structure built on an assumption about the future behavior of prices is a structure that will eventually be tested by a future in which prices behave differently. The second mechanism of the 2008 crisis was the financialization of those mortgages, the packaging of individual home loans into complex securities, sold and resold through a chain of institutions until the original connection between the loan and the borrower had been abstracted into near invisibility. Mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, instruments whose value depended on assumptions about default rates modeled on historical data from a period when lending standards were entirely different. When actual default rates began diverging from modeled rates in 2007, the securities built on those models began losing value simultaneously across the entire financial system because every major institution had exposure to the same underlying assumptions through different financial products. The Amish had zero exposure to this mechanism, not because they were philosophically opposed to financial innovation, but because the Gemeindekasse, the community capital pool Ezekiel documented throughout his ledger, does not export capital to external institutions. Capital contributed to the Gemeindekasse circulates inside the community. It funds community members' needs at zero interest and returns to the pool upon repayment. It does not get packaged into securities. It does not get leveraged against other instruments. It does not acquire exposure to assumptions being made by institutions in New York about borrowers in Nevada. The closed-loop architecture that makes the Gemeindekasse less profitable in expansion years is exactly what made it invulnerable in 2008. You cannot lose value in a system you are not connected to. The Amish were not connected. The third mechanism was employment fragility. As the financial crisis cascaded from the banking sector into the broader economy, Businesses operating on thin margins and short-term credit lines found those credit lines withdrawn simultaneously. The 8.7 million jobs lost between 2008 and 2010 were not lost because those workers had suddenly become less productive. They were lost because the credit infrastructure supporting the businesses employing them had collapsed, and businesses without access to operating credit cannot sustain payrolls regardless of underlying productivity. Amish employment operates on a fundamentally different structure. The dominant employment relationship in Amish communities is not employee to corporation. It is family to enterprise, supplemented by community labor exchange. The Gelassenheit principle of mutual yield and shared work that Ezekiel describes throughout his ledger as the social operating system of the community. An Amish family farm or workshop does not have a payroll dependent on an external credit line. Its operating capital is internal. When external credit markets freeze, Amish enterprises do not lose access to operating capital because they were never dependent on external credit markets for that capital in the first place. The 2008 crisis was, at its core, a crisis of credit dependency, and the Amish had systematically eliminated credit dependency from every layer of their economic structure. The standard narrative about the Amish and financial crises is that they are protected by their separation from the modern economy, that their insularity functions as an accidental hedge against systemic risk. That narrative is wrong, and it is wrong in a way that matters. The Amish are not separate from the modern economy. They sell into it, buy from it, and operate within it every day. The separation is not economic, it is structural. The Amish participate in the market economy at the output level, selling goods and services, while maintaining an entirely different internal structure for capital formation, asset ownership, and risk distribution. They take the market's prices without taking the market's debt architecture. And it is the debt architecture, not the market itself, that failed in 2008. Ezekiel understood this distinction in 1887, with a clarity that most modern financial analysis still struggles to articulate. On page 17 of his ledger, he draws a literal line across the page and labels what is above it der Markt, the market, and what is below it die Gemeinschaft, the community. Above the line, prices, transactions, external relationships. Below the line, capital structure, debt policy, labor relationships, asset ownership. His accounting entries move freely across that line, selling to the market, buying from the market. But the structural principles below the line never cross upward. The community's capital architecture does not get exported into the market's risk environment. That line, maintained with discipline across 200 years, is what the 2008 crisis could not cross. Here is the number I want you to carry out of this. In 2008, the median American household lost approximately $50,000 in net worth in a single year. That $50,000 loss, at a modest 5% annual return, represents approximately $215,000 in future wealth that never gets built, because the capital that would have compounded it was destroyed in the crisis instead. The Amish did not lose that $50,000. They did not lose the $215,000 it would have become. They also did not lose the next crisis's equivalent, because the structure that protected them in 2008 is the same structure that protected them in 1987, in 1929, and in every economic disruption between Ezekiel's time and ours. The crisis-proof system Ezekiel built has 3 load-bearing walls. Own what you occupy, no mortgage, no lender's claim, no foreclosure mechanism. Circulate capital internally. No exposure to external instruments. No dependency on credit lines that can be withdrawn. Build employment on community labor exchange. No payroll dependent on external financing. No mass layoff when credit markets freeze. None of these walls requires a sophisticated financial product. None requires a credential or a platform. They require only the discipline to build a financial structure that does not contain the specific vulnerabilities that every major financial crisis in the last century has exploited. I have nothing to sell you. What I want from you is one specific answer in the comments. In 2008, did your household lose wealth, hold steady, or gain? Just one of those three words. Because the distribution of those answers tells me exactly what to go deeper on next. The next entry in this series goes directly at the mechanism Ezekiel called Papiergeldfalle, the paper money trap, and examines why every financial crisis since 1913 has followed the same structural pattern and why the Amish system has been immune to that pattern every single time. The entry on page 22 of the ledger is where that story starts. It is not a comfortable read, but after 2008, I think you are ready for it.